Hey guys, this is Clarion and welcome to the Redux tutorial. So today we're going to be doing a complete tutorial on Redux fundamentals, very simplified and should be easy to follow, easy to code along. We're going to make a movie app together, a movie list app. The state's going to be maintained and changed with Redux. We're going to use some async action as well with some fetching some user data, and we're going to also put that in our app as well. So by the end of the video, we should have a clear, concise understanding of the core concepts of Redux, how it works, why to use it, and its fundamentals. So like a good launching point, because I find that on the internet when you're Googling Redux and you're coming from React with hooks or your class component state and you want to start diving into it, there's a lot of long-winded and convoluted explanations out there. There's a few really good ones which have inspired this, but there are lots of long-winded ones, and that's, I don't think that's the fault of anybody. I think that's just because Redux in itself has a lot of boilerplate, and generally to explain it, if you don't have all the jargon and you're coming straight from React, it could be a little bit confusing at first. But once you get past that, it's pretty, you can get the basics down pretty quickly. So that's what we're going to aim to do today. So you can code along, and let's get going. I'm just going to have some coffee. I'm a big fan of coffee. Sorry. Okay. So let's look at, before we begin, let's look at two concepts for Redux. First, we got the infamous diagram over here, which I'm sure some of you are quite familiar with. So we've got our diagram. On the left, it says without Redux. On the right, with Redux. Let's say these are two applications we have. These could be our two React applications. So the first question we should ask ourselves, just like when we start using any popular library in React, like, no, don't just import it and get ready to jump in before you even know what you're doing. Have a good reason to be using it. And there is a very good reason with Redux, which is why over 1,000 companies, including Instagram, is using it, is because it really helps once your app starts to get very complicated. What do I mean by that? So once a component needs to share state with another component that it does not have a parent-child relationship with, things start to get complicated. So over here on our left, where it says without Redux, you can see as our app is progressing and you have state being passed on back and forth, things are starting to get pretty hairy. You have this component sending information over here, which is sending it up there. This information is being sent down here. Your data is going everywhere. Imagine you have a bug somewhere over here and you're trying to trace it and you're moving it around, and you can tell, okay, this isn't necessarily so bad, but imagine if this pyramid just started to and it can happen, you get some very complicated apps out there. Well, complicated, I guess you can just say colossal or these big giants. And over here on our right, we have another example of the same app, hypothetically, of the same app, and it's got a store. It's using Redux. So Redux has a store, which basically for your state management, and the data is being passed from the store into the components and going back in. We have a Redux cycle. So all of a sudden now, in this situation, when our app is much more complex, what we can do is we can trace all of our information much better. The data management we can apply we have great Redux devtools. We have middleware. We can do all sorts of things to keep our data managed and much more organized than without it. And this is why it is become so popular over the past few years, and is and here you are, here we are. So yeah, okay, and let's look at the other example over here, and I should probably have one more sip of coffee first. Okay, parsing my lips. All right, so now that we understand why we should be using Redux, let's look at the Redux cycle. So basically, how does Redux work? How are we implementing it? And again, So this circuit here that we have, essentially you know, it is another demonstration of why Redux is powerful. Basically, we have, I'll just go through it first, but we have we create an action. Action is an object, and within the action, we can set, we set a type and a payload. And so this information can be fed through dispatch. Dispatch is a function which is forwarding the actions to our reducers, which is also a function. And then the reducers, essentially, they get the information, the data from the action. You supply that information, and then as well, you can supply additional information, and that can change the state. So then we create new state, and then we wait until the new state to update the state again. And that goes to the store. The information gets passed along in this cycle, just like the cycle of life. Okay, maybe not exactly just like that, but a little bit of drama, Okay, and so so there you go. So not so bad, right, really? So if you think of it in terms of how we're going to be setting up our architecture for the file structure, we are going to make a store file, then we're going to have our actions file. So we have all of our actions, we have all of our reducers, we have our index for our store. That information will be sent to our source index, which will be wrapped around by a provider. The provider gets fed into our application, and that's how our application is able to receive the information. Hopefully that makes sense. If it sounds a little bit like going over your head a little bit, that's okay, because just like with anything, when you talk about it, Once you start coding, it makes, for me anyway, it makes a lot more sense once I start to see it in action, which we're going to get doing. But for now, just if you can remember, if you can just have a core idea and remember why we're using it, that it has, it's going to manage our state and data flow much better, and that we have a system here. And again, you can see how now that we have this system with our actions and our dispatch, our reducers and state, it'll be, if we have bugs or whatever is going on, you can see how it becomes more clear to trace what's going on in our app, with our app, because we have this cycle that we're implementing. We're taking control. Got to take control. So let's get cracking, right? Enough of this jibba jabba. All right, coding. So I'm going to be using terminal because that way you can see it better instead of the VS Code console for now. Anyway, so let's go to your desktop, your files, and let's do an npx create React app and call it redux-movie list, right? Okay, so I've already gone ahead and done that. You can hit enter. Because my internet is a little bit ridiculous lately, so I didn't want to sit around cutting that and editing it. But anyway, do that first, and once we have our everything installed, you can open up the file on your text editor of choice. Got my VS Code over here. And here we go. We got the Redux. Okay, let's go back into our terminal, actually, and we are going to install some packages just so that we have them. So npm install, let's do Redux, because we need that. We're going to get React Redux so that we can connect our React application to our Redux, which we will see. And we also need to have Redux Thunk, since we will be performing some async actions, and we are going to need some custom middleware in order to do that with Redux, which we'll see as well. So let's go ahead and get the ball rolling and install those packages. As those are installing, I'm going to go into our editor here, and I am going to get rid of some stuff and clean some things up. So we are not going to be using jest. We're not going to do any tests or anything. So let's delete the app test. Okay, let's get rid of the logo, sorry. We don't need a logo for this. Let's go into app.js. Okay, in our app, let's get rid of all this stuff which we don't need. We can keep the class name app because I'm lazy. about the styling. Let's get rid of the logo on the import. Just deleted that, just so you see. And beneath our div in our function app, we could tab in and let's write a title. So let's put an H3. And let's title this app Redux Movie List Application App, whatever. Go ahead and save that. All right, looks like our packages have been installed. And I'm super out of it this morning. I didn't even install the modules in the folder. So make sure, guys, when you're doing that, that you are not as ridiculous as I am to cd in. After you do your npx create React app, you have to cd into Redux. Make sure movie list. Make sure you're in your source and npm install Redux and do that again. Okay, wow. All right, so I'm going to do that again and delete those packages after. Sorry about that. All right, so that's still going. We've done this. Should I wait for this now? Or, you know what? Let's go ahead and make our architecture file system for Redux. So in our source, we make a new folder, and we're going to call it our store. The store, like we said, is where we're going to be having all of our reducers are going to be coming into our store. We're going to be connecting them up. We're going to be creating our store over here, initializing state, doing all the good things that we need to do to get Redux started. In our store, we're going to have two folders, if you can guess what they are, based on if you remember from the Redux cycle. What do you think we need? Yes. Correct. We are going to need our actions folder and our reducers in our store. Okay, so we got our folders set up over here. Also in our index, we'll make a file. Sorry, not in our index. In our store, we're going to make a file, and we're going to call it index. Okay. All right. Okay, now I've installed the node modules in their correct location. Good for me. So I'm going to go ahead and npm start and run the development server. So you can type in npm start, and let's get the puppy. Let's get this local host. Car. All right, what do I got? Like, let's turn this sucker on. That's terrible. More coffee. All right. Oh. Blah, blah, blah. Do I want to restore? Yeah, I'm going to restore the pages because I was using this. Okay, perfect. All right. So as that gets ready to boot up, let's go ahead and let's go ahead and think about our cycle again. So going back to here in our Redux cycle, we need to have actions and reducers. Our actions are going to be having information to update our reducers. So we want to have a movie list in our app. What is our app doing? Our app is basically going to essentially, we're going to have some movies, and then you can get some new movies, you can update them. So we're going to want to create our movie list, and we're going to be able to update them and manage that in our Redux. So let's think about our actions. Let's make an action. How about an action to update the movies? That makes sense, right? So in our actions, we're going to make a file, and we're going to call it update movies. That's going to be our first action. So it's going to be an object. So we can do constant update movies equals object, which is going to take a type, which will be a string. We're going to call update movies _ movies, and we're going to have a payload. And for this tutorial, let's make the payload the movie that we want to update to, just so you have an idea of the fundamentals of how this is going to work. So what movie? What is a good movie? Good movie. Since this is a movie app, you should be good with movies. So type in your favorite movie, whatever that is. For me, I'm going to type in The Breakfast Club because it's a great movie. Okay. Export. It is a great movie. I don't know why I'm laughing. Export default update movies. Okay, so then we're gonna export it, put in your movie that you love, that you want people to be enjoying as much as you do. And let's also, because this is going to be good practice here, because you can make mistakes and errors, and what is standard is essentially to remove the strings of our type. And by doing that, what we do is we just make it a variable, set it to the string. Okay? So then we don't need our quotations anymore. And there you go. That's your first action. You've just created a Redux action, and hopefully you have an understanding that basically this action, what it's doing, we can go over it again. You have a type. It's called update movies. What it's going to be doing, it's going to be sending out the payload of the movie which that we want to update to our reducer, which doesn't exist yet. And we are exporting that so that we can use it for our reducers and in our Redux store. With our dispatch. So hopefully that's beginning to make sense. And if we also check here, it says we've been compiled successfully. Hopefully your npm, your local server is working, so you can go check that out. Go to your local host, and you should see Redux movie list app. I'm also going to open up the JavaScript console here. All right. So why don't we look, before we go into when we create our store, we're going to need a reducer. And so we're going to go into our reducer folder over here, and we will create a file. And it's going to be our movie list reducer. So why don't we call it movie list reducer? Okay. And we will need to import the update movies, our type, from actions, update movies, right? And, oh yeah, let me see. Let's make sure that we're not being too ridiculous this morning. Oh, wow. Okay. Okay. Yep, don't forget your semicolons. And what else do we want to do? So now we want to make a function. So constant movie list reducer is going to be, we're going to use ES6 arrow functions. It's going to take state as its first parameter and action as its second. But we're not going to do action. Instead, we're going to do some destructuring because we use type and payload. So type and payload. And very good. And what do we want to do here exactly? So let's think about it. Now we want to get in our type and payload, and that's the information we want to be able to update. But we want our movie list reducer to give it the logic that we want to tell it in order to update based on our conditions. And the cleanest approach to do this, that's generally the most readable, that people use as a standard in Redux, is to use a switch for your condition. So we're going to use a switch. We're going to give it type, and switch takes a case. So in the case of update movies, we want to return, what do we want to return? The payload, right? And switch also needs a default, and the default we will return will be our state. Since our state isn't anything, why don't we set our state to an empty object? There you go. And okay, let's go ahead and export default the movie list reducer. All right, and let's save that. Awesome. Okay, look at that. So again, let's go over this before we move forward, just so you have an idea. So we have imported our update movies, which is our type, from our action movies, which is update movies, which has a type, and the payload is the movie The Breakfast Club, or whatever movie that you want your users to be updated with. And this we've imported over here into our reducers. Our reducer has state, it has the type and a payload from our actions. It takes a switch in the switch, we can give some, provide some information and logic of what we want to do with our information, and we can modify it. In this situation, basically, we're saying that when we're going to dispatch update movies, we're going to return this payload of the movie, The Breakfast Club in my case, right? Does that make sense? I mean, hopefully that makes some sense. And now that we have our actions in our reducer, we can go ahead and let's go to our index.js, and let's in the index in our store, and let's build our store, right? So we're going to import a few things. We're going to need to import create store, and let's do that from Redux. We're also going to import combine reducers. Now we only have one reducer for the time being, but we are going to implement this just for the sake of our tutorial, so you get an understanding, and we will be adding another reducer, so just bear with that. So let's get create store combine reducers, and we need our reducer as well. So let's import movie list reducer from reducers. Nope. Movie list reducer. Okay. All right. Okay, so let's make our store. Constant store should be our create store. Okay, and inside our create store is where we can add our information. So, all right, so what else should we have before we do that? So why don't we make a constant for our reducer, and we will set that to our combine reducers, which will take an object. And for the sake of this tutorial, we'll put in movie list reducer. And when you're combining your reducers, now you have the option as an object where you can set it to whatever name that's going to make sense when you're using it in your state in your app. So we're going to set it to movies. Okay, save that. Let's also make some initial state, right? So constant initial state. And we will take a name, which will be another object. Actually, sorry. No, we will call it movie because that'll be our movie. That will take the name. And the initial state, let's say that in our app, when you turn it on, you have your initial movie list of whatever it was that you saved. We know we're not saving anything. We're creating a database. It's just a front end for this exercise tutorial, but let's just choose another movie. Let's say this is the movie that you had saved previously. So pick another movie that you love, and for our users, educate them with your knowledge of movies. Let me have a sip of coffee, please. Thank you. All right. And I'm going to pick the Terminator 2. Terminator 2. Awesome. Yeah. Okay, cool. And so we have our reducer, we have our initial state. So in our store, it could take some parameters. So we're going to put in the reducer. We're going to add our initial state. And we're also going to take a look now, before we move any forward, at the Redux devtools, because these are pretty awesome. So if you go on your Chrome or your browser, and if you type in if you Google Redux DevTools extension, and you see the website, the GitHub, if we go on the Git, click on the Git, and then we can just learn Git. Scroll down. Okay, so you can see the GUI over here. Nice screenshot. Exciting stuff. All right, so 1.1, basic store. That's what we're going to be using. So if we look, constant store, create store, we have our reducer, we have our preloaded state, our initial state, and there you go. Then we have this window.redux devtools extension. So this will implement our Redux devtools extension in our browser, which then we can follow. We can trace our state. If we're running jest and test, we can see it up on there as well. It's pretty great. So why don't we copy this code? And after our initial state, back in our index over here in our store, we're going to put it in there. We're going to save. And we are going to export default the store, right? And let's save. Okay. And let's go back to our app over here. All right. So now I think we have our action. We have an action. We have a reducer. We have a store that we've built up. However, it's not connected to anything in our app yet, right? So our app is just basically this title. It has no idea what's going on yet with our action and our reducer, but we want to introduce them. We think they can be friends. We think they can do a lot of good things together, you know, like movie list stuff. So why don't we go ahead in our index and our source over here and import these things. So let's import what we need to finally connect our store to our application. So let's import the store from store index, right? Nope. Was talking to my computer there. Index. Okay, and let's also import store, and we need something called provider, which we get from our React Redux, because this is going to connect it's basically the provider. If you go under your React DOM.render over here before app, you can bring in your provider. You wrap it around your app, and this allows you to send in your store, like that. Save that, and now our store is being wrapped around our entire app. So we now have access to our reducers and all of our information. If we go back to our Redux cycle over here, where we've created our actions, we've created our reducers, we're not yet determining any information. We're not yet displaying our initial state. We were unable to do that, but now that we have hooked up into our app, our store, we now have the power to connect everything and make this work, this circuit work. You know, we had our components set up, and now we can actually run some power, some juice into this baby, right? So let's do it, right? Enough with the chit chat. Another thing to check out, let's just check this out, because this should be cool. Go to your Redux, go back to your app over here. If you look up on your browser, you should see on the top right, if you have Google Chrome, an icon, and it should be lit up. That looks like this. And if you hover, it should say Redux DevTools. Let's click on it, and it's lit up. And whoa, look at that. There we go. So we got our DevTools extension. And if you click on state, we can see movies, which is an empty array. All right, and hold on a second here. We have an error that says unexpected key movie found in previous state received by the reducer, expected to find one of the known reducer keys movies. Unexpected key will be ignored. Oof, serious stuff. So let's see what's going on. Already we're using our extension here. All right, so if I go back into the index.js, I made a little typo here. Basically, I have in the combined reducers, I set movie list reducer to be called movies. You could call it anything you want. That makes sense. Or you could just, if you just leave it as movie list reducer, then it'll default to movie list reducer. But when I'm initializing it as movie, and that is a mistake. That's why it doesn't understand what to do, and it's setting it to the other initial state, which is our empty state in our reducer. So why don't we fix that, put movies, save, and go back to our app. And let's go back to our DevTools. And if we click on state, look at that. So now our state has a name, Terminator2. Yeah. All right. Awesome. All right, so we got some state initialized. So why don't we go ahead and display this state so our users can see it. So we're going to click on our app.js, and we're going to import a couple things. We're going to import our action, which is update movies, from store actions update movies. And we're also going to import something called connect, which is what's going to be connecting our app to our store. Connects the whole thing as we discussed. Again, that's going to be from, you guessed it, React Redux, because it connects React to Redux. All right, and let's save that. Let's go down to our export default of our app and hook this up. So we're going to pass connect. It's going to take parentheses, and we're also going to put our app in parentheses. Inside connect, you have two parameters that we use. We've got map state to props with your camel case. So, and then we have map dispatch to props after that, but we're not going to do that for now. So do map state to props, and let's make a variable map state to props and send it some state, an arrow function, and we're going to return this object of state. So here now we have access to set up our movies that we can then make it accessible to render in our app so we can see this in action. Excuse me. So we're going to set movies to our, movies to our movies, and we're going to be doing that by state. Just simple as that, movies, state.movies. So look at that. It really isn't that bad, right? I mean, once you just got to put in all this boilerplate, but once you start setting it up, you can start to see now we're about to get to that nitty gritty where we can start playing around with our information and data and do all the things we want to be doing and start building and thinking about that we enjoy. So I'm not really the greatest stylist in the world here, and for the purposes of doing a Redux beginner's tutorial like this, a complete one especially, it's a pretty fairly long video. I'm not going to sit around doing the whole thing on CSS. So, but that being said, we do want it to be, looking a little bit okay, at least, that you can see what's happening at the bare minimum. So we're going to make a BR tag, magnificent BR tag, and underneath that, we are going to make a P tag. And in our P tag here, we're going to have some JavaScript, so we have to use our brackets. And we are going to, now that we have map state to props, we can actually call props in our app because it's connected to our store and our provider. And inside here now we can actually access props .movies.name. And so let's save that and see. Hopefully it should be working. And if you go back to your app over here on your local host, you should see Terminator 2. Awesome. If you click on your extensions, you have your initial state, Terminator 2. It's being reflected in your app. You're on the right track. Awesome work. If you've made it this far and you've coded along, you've actually come pretty far in your fundamental understanding of Redux. I hope this has been clear so far and has given you a little bit of more confidence to move ahead. So good job. Am I just using this as a moment to drink some coffee? Perhaps. Perhaps not. All right, back inside the code. So now we got that working, but how about we take a look at dispatching our actions and seeing the state update and finishing our cycle so that we can have a complete Redux cycle here for our first reducer. So next to this, we're going to do map dispatch to props, adding a second parameter here. You can also say map actions to props, generally used. I prefer dispatch. I like to think of it as like a factory dispatching the information. That's just me. So it's going to take, it's another function. It's going to take dispatch as its parameter. Return another object here. Let's say we want to return in our dispatch our action, essentially, right? So our update movies, let's just call it update movies again, because that makes sense. So we're inside our update movies. So the property, we're going to call a function for our dispatch, which is going to call our update movies. And basically this is letting us use our dispatch now. So now we can access the update movies. If we want to update it here, we can reflect the information. And all we have to do now that we have our dispatch set up is underneath, let's say underneath our p tag over here, let's make a button. That's going to have an on-click event. And here we can use our props dot, what do you think we should use, or what are we using in order to update the movie? Because remember, in our actions, we want to update this movie. We have the Terminator, but we want our users to be able to access the next movie, The Breakfast Club, right? Because they can't just watch the Terminator and go to sleep. They're gonna have weird dreams. They need something to cool off with, something deep and meaningful. Not that the Terminator isn't deep and meaningful. Okay, all right. It's a different video. So props dot, yes, you guessed it, update movies. Excellent work. So let's save that and see what happens. Go back to our app. Okay, so this button is not existent. Let's go back here. I did not actually label the button. So why don't we say update or select next movie, right? Like that. Okay, there's our beautiful button, our really nice styled app here. So if we click select next movie, let's see what happens. Wow, okay, so something's breaking. We don't have any errors. What's going on? Okay, don't freak out. It's not the end of the world. Let's check out our extension, because that's what it's for. So we had our initial state over here. And we click on update movies. We sent over the action, and look, okay, The Breakfast Club. So within our logic, inside our cycle, this has happened. This information has gone through. This is what this is telling us. However, it's not being reflected on our app. That's what this means, right? So let's see what we did wrong over here. If we go into our actions, the type, we have a payload. That's what we want. It's pretty simple. Looks okay. If we go in our reducers, what do we have? Switch, update movies, return the payload. Okay, and if we click on our index over here, we have movies. Aha, okay. So we're setting, right, so we made an object called name, and the name is Terminator 2. But in our reducers, we're just returning a payload. So we're not actually sending a payload to the name, which is how we've set up our property. So if we want it to reflect properly, we should make an object here. Let's call it name, and name should be getting payload. Right? So like that, if we save this, this should be sending the payload now into the name, Terminator 2. So let's see if this works. Select next movie, The Breakfast Club. Okay, look at that. That is amazing. That is our Redux cycle right there in action. Look at that. Okay. Though if you've coded up to this point now, then you've completed the Redux cycle, and that's wicked. You created your action, where you put your information or your type and your payload of how you wanted to set it up. You've dispatched this information to your reducer. When you clicked on that button, the reducer decided to return the payload to the name, and then the name changed from the initial state that you set up in a store with your provider, and now it's updated. There you go. Very cool. Good job. More coffee for me. All right, and why don't now we're going to take a look at fetching and using async actions with custom middleware, sending out an API request to get some data, so we have some users in our app. So it's not just this cool app. We could have some user data inside there as well, right? Because we always need some public. We need the public up on this. But before we do that, we should do a little bit of styling. So how about going into your app, right where we set up our props movies name over here. We'll make a little span action. Yeah. And inside span, we could write your current movie is, and a space. And inside span, we're going to do some inline styling. So if you're not familiar, this is JSX. If you use double brackets with style, you have access to your CSS. And this one of the awesome things with React and JSX is that you can do this. And I am a fan of inline styling and material UI as well, and classes. That's again for another tutorial or for another discussion. But for now, let's just so that you can have a clear demonstration of the differences, we're going to do color, and we're going to set to my favorite color, green. Okay, let's save that. If you can't see, sorry about that. Here you go. Oh my god, what am I doing? Okay, and don't forget your semicolons. Okay, and let's save this, and let's go here. Okay, so now your current movie is Terminator 2, Breakfast Club. Everything's working. We have a little bit of style, so this, for the users, they can tell with the green that this is the current movie and this is the thing that's changing. Okay, I know. I don't deserve a medal for this, but at least, hopefully it kind of gives a demonstration for whatever. And let's move on now to our async action over here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our reducers and let's copy paste movie list reducer here. And let's rename it. We're going to call this our user reducer because we're going to be fetching users for our data. So user reducer. And we don't have our action yet, but in import we can assume we're going to have a fetch users, which we can change our case over here. State type payload. This would be coming from a non-existent. Let's call it fetch users. Doesn't exist yet, but we will create it. Our function is going to be renamed to user reducer. We're exporting user reducer now. Okay. Okay, so let's save that. Pretty much the same logic. Since our user is it's going to be fetching an array of data from our API, we're not going to be sending it to a name. So let's just return the payload again. Save that. Let's go into our actions folder and copy paste our update movies, and let's rename this to our fetch users. So export constant fetch users. Again, there is boilerplate, and again with Redux you can see how it could be a little bit tedious updating this stuff, but for large complicated apps you can see the benefits as well. And so this is not going to be an object. We are going to be doing a fetch call of an async and using custom middleware. So what we're going to do is we're going to change the export to fetch users. But here we're going to delete all this. We're going to do constant fetch users, and we're going to make it a function instead. And for now we're going to comment out. Just comment out fetch and save that. Okay. And let's go into our index and our store, and let's bring in, we're going to bring in our fetch users. No, we're going to bring in our reducer, user reducer. We need our other reducer. And now with our second reducer, we can actually bring in user reducer. We're going to call them users. So the property type users to user reducer. And with this, now we can also initialize our user, initialize our users, so just users like this, to an empty array, right? As we mentioned before, and we can save that information. All right, let's check our app. Everything is going as it was because we have not yet sent in any logic into our app. So if we go into our app.js now, go underneath our button, create a BR tag, and actually, okay, so do that. Then go, let's actually add the state. So under movies, state.movies, let's bring in users, and let's make this accessible into our app users, so state.users. All right, so now what we can do is back here in our render, our return, below BR, we're going to set up some logic. So what we want to say is props.users. What do we want to say? We're going to say that if the length is equal to 0, so if there are no users, basically if we haven't fetched any users and we're not receiving any data, then we can have a p tag that says there are no users. There are no users. But should we have some users, why don't we set another p tag and say, you have users, exclamation mark, and a smiley face. Let's save that and check on our app. Okay, so you should be receiving, there are no users. If we check our extension, initialize state, we have our movie, the Terminator, and users is still, it's been initialized as an empty array. Awesome. All right, so why don't we fetch the users and see what happens, right? Because we're almost there. Let's get this final thing rolling. So let's go to a website. I have it loaded over here. So you just type in request response, reqres.in. So this is a cool site to test your front end against real API. So basically, it's you get fake data from an API. It's super easy to plug in. You just this is our base over here. So you can see the different types of things you can get. So we just want to get our list of users. You can see the request is /API users. This is the second page. And then here you have your information that you can pull. You have page, data. We want the data, right? So let's go into our action. Let's go into our fetch users. And uncommon out fetch. Let's put in the URL /API/users. I think that's going to be fine because I'm assuming that you'll be able to access the same thing with just users. Okay, anyway, we'll see. Let's do .then, our response. We're going to turn it to JSON, right? And then once it's JSON, what do we want to do right now with this? Let's just console.log response . As we saw from before, we can take the information. We want the data. Data is the array with all our user information. So let's just do that. Response.data. Let's save that. Okay. Let's go back to our app and let's dispatch the information. So in our constant map dispatch props, we can do we bring in our action? No, so first we have to bring it in. So import fetch users, right? So here we can say fetch users again. Sounds right to me. And we're going to make another function and we will dispatch fetch users from our actions. Okay, save that. And let's actually dispatch it. So let's make a button underneath here. Let's put a BR tag and a button, and the button should say fetch users. And let's do an on-click event. What are we going to do here? Right, same thing, props.fetch users. So let's see what happens. Save this. Go back to our app. There's our button. Let's click on it. Uh-oh, things are exploding. Okay, so it's telling us error actions must be plain objects. Use custom middleware for async actions. So why is this happening? We have set up a function in our action fetch user instead of an object. And if you remember, if we go back into our index, we cannot perform with Redux alone an async action. We need to use some middleware, and we have not actually brought in any middleware. I mean, we have our Redux DevTools extension, but we're not using any custom middleware. And that, if you remember earlier on, we did install the package thunk, and we're not using it. So we're going to bring that in. We're going to bring a few things in. So what we want to have here is, let's bring in this thing called compose. And let's also bring in apply middleware into Redux, from Redux, right? And then here we could also import thunk from Redux thunk, if you remember. So here we're going to make another variable, call it middleware. And we're going to set that into an array of thunk. Okay. And we're going to access that. So we can't just put our window, our DevTools extension. We're going to need to use compose. That's why we brought in compose, so that we can use both our apply middleware and we can use our DevTools. So in order to do that, pretty simple. Just do compose, open parentheses. Let's close the parentheses here and give a space. Type in apply middleware. And we want to use a spread operator. And we can bring in our middleware, right? So our thunk, all of it, and a comma. Let's save. Okay, now let's go back here and let's click on fetch users. And okay, look at that. Very good, very cool. So now what we got here on our console, 6 objects in our array, and each one has a user. Look, we got George Blue, Jeanette Weaver. Okay, I'm waking up again. It's like I was baiting, but now I'm seeing this. The data's coming in. I'm excited. Okay, cool. So this is great, but let's apply the information to our app. Display it properly, and then we have our app completed. Guys, we're almost there. Very good. So let's go into let's go back into our action, actually, because we're not going to want to console log it, right? So instead, in our parameter, we're going to set up our dispatch. Instead of consoling log, we're going to call our dispatch, bring in object, right? Because now we can use our type. And we're going to send it to fetch users, and we can set up our payload. What should our payload be? Right, the response and the data. Awesome. You're getting it. Very good. Let's save that. Okay. Now let's go into our app and let's get this information. So before, okay, there are no users. You have users. Okay, so if we go back to our button, make sure things are working, there are no users. Let's click fetch users. Okay, would you look at that? You have users. Okay, so this means that it's working. This means that now in our DevTools extension, initial, we clicked our fetch users on our button, we sent for fetch users, and our users are popping up. Wicked. So let's have the logic where we can display this and we're there. So it's not just you have users, but we can actually see the users, right? So how do we do that? So instead of you have users over here, we're going to write some other logic, right? We could do props.users, and we can use the map method because we're going to map over them. So we do props.users.map user, and we can send them into our p tag. And inside here, we can fetch different information, right? So now we should have access to our user. If we go back and we look at what they were labeled. Okay, so we have ID, email, first underscore name. So why don't we take user dot first underscore name, and also with a dash here, and let's put user dot email. And let's save. Oops. User. And make sure that this is closed properly. Props users.map. Okay. Oops. And what did I do here? Did we close it properly? Oh. Okay, so remember that we opened up for our JavaScript on our JSX in order to use JavaScript here in our return. Since we have these BR tags, we have to be using these brackets. So save that like that. Okay, sorry if you can't see. Maybe you can see this better. Okay, it should be working. Okay, compiled successfully. Let's go back to our app. And let's fetch users. Okay, good and bad news. Good news, we've got the users. That's awesome. We got their names and the emails like we typed in. We are getting this error message. Each child English. Oh, right. Okay, so we need to have set up a key ID, especially with mapping, right? because otherwise, so we just write a key over here and we can have a unique ID. So why don't we do user.id, right? Let's save that inside the P. Let's go back to this. All right, no errors, always good. Next movie, The Breakfast Club. And there you go. Good. Okay, so great job. If you've come this far coding along, then now you've seen the initial users, you've set up a store, actions, and your reducers. You understand why to use Redux, when to use it. You have this foundation here. We've fetched users. We've done async action. We've used custom middleware. We've used our extensions. I'm not going to do the testing and the jest stuff because it's already very long. But, well, very long considering like our generation's attention span, including mine. But yeah, there you go. You should feel pretty good because now you have seen the Redux cycle in action. We have created our actions, which had to type in the payload. We updated the movies. When you click on the button, it's dispatched to the reducers. We told the reducers to return the payload when it finds the type. Which it did to your favorite movie, then the state gets updated. We've seen that. We've managed to fetch an API call from a real API, and oops, where is it? Yeah, from this website, managed to get our data. So awesome! I hope this tutorial has helped you guys a little bit. Starting out, I know for me, I found that there was a lot of this stuff online is fairly long-winded and convoluted, but there's a few that I really love, and so I got inspired to just do this one up, and hopefully it's helpful for some people. And thanks for coding along and checking this out. And that's it, So that's it. Bye. Thanks. Okay. And